You all should get a notification from Zoom to accept to stay in the call, and we'll go ahead and get started. So hi, Stephen. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jessica. Thanks. Glad to be here.
So Stephen is a graduate of our program who is currently working in the industry. And Stephen, if you could give an update on where you work, what your job title is, and just some basic current resumes items.
Sure. So yeah, I was part of Momentum Team 12, which actually started just over a year ago, which is crazy to think about. I think it was like March 21st of 2022. I graduated in July and I got a job at nCino, which is a fintech company here where I'm based in Wilmington in North Carolina. So I work on our customer success team as an associate data support engineer. So that essentially is I get to interface with our customers who are financial institutions. So banks, credit unions. We also have some like ag farm credit unions, which is kind of interesting. So the specific team I work on is data. So we work with our Informatica cloud integration. And Informatica is an ETL, extract, transform, and load tool. What it does is it allows financial institutions to securely send data about their customers over to the nCino platform. So my job is to assure that that's working properly, and also to make changes or to triage issues as we see them. So yeah, it's a lot of a lot of like the soft skills that I got from Momentum, I use every single day. And definitely having the technical background in software engineering has also been really helpful for this role. And I think it's kind of given me some advantages that people who come into the role I'm in without this background, they don't have those. I think it's made it a lot easier for me to pick up on new concepts because they call it drinking from the fire hose. And it's like that every single day. There's not a day in my job so far where I've not been learning something new. And it'll probably be like that for another year, I would say. That's what everyone tells me. But yeah, it's really cool. I get to go on calls with customers a lot. So it's really helped me brush up on my communication skills and talking to people that I don't know. Cold calling is kind of weird. I think especially for younger folks who grew up with all this like social media and stuff. So it's really helped me, I think, round out my interpersonal skills. And it's also been a really great way for me to learn about nCino
in progress
perspective. I think we had someone.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and mute. Hi, Daniel.
Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, I was like getting feedback. But yeah, it's been great because I have this unique perspective of having this technical background that you get from Momentum, and also now seeing things from the customer's perspective, and that really lends itself to being able to communicate with our internal stakeholders, so like people in our product team who actually build the product, to say like, hey, these are our common pain points that we're seeing with our customers, or these are things that they're suggesting that we really think could be improved. So yeah, there are so many things I could kind of go on about with what I do. So I'd be glad to answer any other like specific questions that you have, because I feel like I could go down a million different paths with this.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, I love hearing about what you're doing in your day-to-day job, and to take a step back to set some context for our listeners. Something that's really interesting is, so Momentum, many of you already know us, that's why you're here, but we train folks in a broad skill set to get you started, to launch your career. And Stephen, we've got people that go all different kinds of fields. And I think what's so cool about what your job is you're working with financial institutions. When you're talking about what you do every day, it's high stakes. You've got a lot to consider in your day-to-day job. And it is really a great starting point for you to have, in the sense that you're getting to know a customer, clientele, you're getting to understand the technical perspective, you're working both with external stakeholders and then the internal organization that you support. let's take a step back into like how you even got into this field, how the light went off and what you were seeking from a job and a career. Because I remember when we had our initial conversation, you live at the beach, you wanted to stay at the beach, you wanted to be able to work alongside people. And that was really important to you. So can you talk about what you did, kind of your college experience, what led you to think about a career in technology and, kind of your pre-momentum life first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been really, ever since I was a kid, like I was really interested in computers and technology, and I always would like take my toys apart, which always upset my parents, because I wanted to understand how things worked. And when I got through, probably like halfway through high school, I started to not do so well in math compared to everyone else my age. So I kind of thought that I kind of just lost the desire, I guess, to go into this field, even though I'd been thinking about that going up into high school, because I felt like I didn't have the technical skills and that I was never going to catch up. So I decided to pursue other interests in college, which were more humanities based. I went to NC State from 2016 to 2021. I originally went there undeclared, and they have a really good program that kind of helps you find a major if you go there undeclared. I ended up going into political science and anthropology as my majors with a minor in German studies. Um, and while I really, enjoyed that and still find those, I'm still really interested in those topics, I just really didn't see a path forward for me in terms of a career that I would find fruitful and also, like frankly, make money in. And then while I was graduating, we were also like right in the middle of COVID. So I ended up moving back home, so back here to Wilmington. And, I just was kind of like working odd jobs in the service industry. And I really wasn't satisfied. And I kind of was just waiting for something to, I was kind of just expecting something to fall into my lap, which in retrospect was a little unrealistic. And one day I was on LinkedIn because I was trying to update my resume, and I found this random post. And to this day, I know it's a Momentum alum. I still don't know who you are. Whoever you are, thank you. They had posted about Momentum, and it like this wasn't someone in my network. Like it's like Facebook when it's like, oh, this person you are friends with, their friend liked this post. It's like it was like that. Like I had no connection to whoever posted this, but they had posted about Momentum. I remember saving it on my phone. I went home the next day. I looked it up. I filled out the interest form on the website. And then one day I'm driving around town and Jessica cold calls me. And so I pull into a parking lot and we're just talking for like 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, she's serious about this. Okay. So I talked to my parents about it, and, we agreed like they would support me and I would pay them back through my job. And I was in team 12. That was the cohort that started last March. And I don't know, I just haven't looked back. I mean, I got to work with some really cool people. Our final project, I think, really took into account our interests. If you remember Jessica, Jamie, he just got a job actually. But this guy, Jamie, who I was working with on the front end team, he was a producer, an off-Broadway producer for 25 years or something. So he has a lot of experience in the music industry. So we built like a music focused app. So yeah, it was just, once we got to redo mixtape. I just saw Manny's comment. But yeah, it just, once I kind of saw what this industry could offer, and to realize that like, you don't, the kind of prerequisite, like these things you must have is kind of not true. It kind of gave me the faith to go back into it and try it again. So.
Yeah, I think this is all really excellent and so true. There's themes here about your experience that are true to Momentum folks, which is, when you talked about your choice of college major, it just shows you've got a curiosity for learning. And that's really the foundation of what it takes for any career, truly, any long-term career path. But if you've got a foundation for learning and curiosity, this is a great career field because it's going to challenge you to learn every day. There's never a bored moment when you get into technology, because technology is obviously always changing. You're always in a problem-solving mode. And it does give you that freedom, to your point of, I'm going to be in a career where I'm going to be learning all the time, and I'm going to be financially compensated for that, for bringing my mind and my curiosity and problem solving abilities to a job. And that also gives you wings to do so much outside of it. I would say, so many of our grads are musicians or do touring or are artists, or, have something going on outside their life. And this gives them it's truly about a launch pad. So taking that curiosity and applying it in a way that's going to get you a job and a career where you're going to be supported financially, still scratch that itch and that curiosity, which is really cool. So you decided to make the change. We had a conversation. You've got your family's support, and you jumped right into it. What was it like for you to learn to code and be in a classroom with people like Jamie? And for context, for those of you that haven't done the program, what's so cool is it's a multi-generational environment. There's people coming from all different walks of life, all different perspectives. What is it like getting thrown into a 16-week experience with people? And especially for you at the beginning of the pandemic, or in the height of the pandemic, I should say, what was the experience of learning like?
It was hard. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It was really hard. But taking a step back and realizing how much we accomplished in 16 weeks was it's still really hard for me to comprehend, because, there are times I think my job is just super hard, and I'm very confused about what's going on, and I feel like I'm just not getting it. I'm not able to retain enough information, but the pace is nothing like the way it was in code school. And I'm not saying that to, anyone who's thinking about this or is about to start. I'm not saying that to scare you, because if you are starting, congratulations, you're going to do really well. That was the cool thing. Everyone who did it, no matter in my cohort, no matter what their level of confidence was, I think we all had the Dunning-Kruger effect going into it. That hit me pretty hard early on, when I couldn't do basic, or I shouldn't say that. When I couldn't do what I thought was basic CSS styling, that was hard. Images, didn't know how to size them properly. But it kind of what I was touching on earlier. I think the biggest change was, it wasn't just about learning to code. It was about learning how to work with other people. And also, to your point, working remote and working in peak COVID were two, kind of interesting things. Jamie's on the West Coast working with different time zones. That was just it was just an eye opener, I guess. And it definitely kind of informed my job search, as you know, Jessica. But I think it also just taught me about flexibility, and open-mindedness, working with people from different perspectives. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I keep touching on the soft and people skills, but I think that's really where I saw the most growth. Because here's the thing, you may think that you cannot learn to code. Anyone can learn to code. And I know that's something I heard the instructor say, and I didn't believe them. Now I'm on the other side telling you this too, but it's just the truth. Anyone can learn to code. I think the biggest thing I got out of this process, and the biggest thing I learned from being in the cohort, was how to work on teams, how to be in a flexible, agile working environment, how to work with people who work remote, how to work with people with different backgrounds. That's where I saw the most growth, I would say.
And that is the truth of being in a professional job. And so we really create a sandbox environment where you get to test that in a learning environment first. Because to your point, all of those skills are what's used on the job. And those sometimes can be the hardest aspects of a job. It's actually some of those intangibles. It's not necessarily always the technical element of the job. It's the combination of understanding that, problem solving, and then working with others. And especially translates, I'm sure, into what you're doing, because you're working with people and
yes.
So that's a good segue into your approach to the job search. And I do remember you were very intentional about your job search, and you were very clear. And you said, like, it might take me a little bit longer, but this is what I want. So can you share about what for you made sense in the job search? What was your intention, and what were you getting out of it? Wanting to
Yeah.
get.
So, uh, I talked about, learning to work in a remote environment. Being someone who my last 2 years of college were spent basically online. Um, you know, it makes perfect sense that Momentum is remote now. I think that that's a great change, from before COVID, because it gets to reach so many more people. And like, I would have never gotten to work with someone like Jamie, for example. Um, but once I graduated and I was thinking about what I wanted to do to start my own career, I knew that I wanted to be somewhere that was predominantly in person. Either had a like 50-50 policy with work, or was just the default was in person. And so here in Wilmington, there are three kind of major companies who they're kind of like sister spinoff companies of one another. So there's Live Oak Bank, which was founded back in 2009, I want to say. nCino, which I think was a spinoff of Live Oak, and that was back in like 2011. And then there's Aperture, which I think was spun out or was incubated back in like 2017. So they share a lot of the same DNA, I guess, but they each also have their own distinct, like applications in fintech. But they're all fintech based companies. They're all in person. So really, in my job search, I had kind of narrowed it down to those three. I still was looking at other remote first places like Cisco and Red Hat. I even looked at like PPD. That's another company here in Wilmington. But I really was focused on those core three because I also had some people that I met through Momentum, like Hank, for example, and also some family friends who, worked at a couple of those companies. And so, when Katie talks about like networking, that was a huge, like very uncomfortable, but very important thing for me. So like getting coffee with people, like actually meeting with people face to face, if that was an option. That's really what I was like trying to do. Like I did some Zoom stuff too, but I was just really trying to emphasize, like, let me put my face in front of this person so they know who I am and know that I'm interested in their company. It was a really good way for me to learn more about those companies too. And I actually had gotten coffee with Hank at one point, and he put me in touch with the recruiter on their product team. And so product is, it's probably the biggest, or it is the biggest team at nCino. And they are responsible for building and maintaining, the nCino product. So that's where like the software engineers tend to be in that department. And the recruiter reached out to me and said, "Hey, that's like, Hank kind of giving you this endorsement is like a big deal in my book," which was like super flattering. Like we're actually not hiring right now for software engineers, but our support team is hiring right now. So like, why don't like you should go check that out and then reach out to their recruiter. And so I did that. I actually ended up going down this whole process that I wasn't even expecting, because originally, my thought was like, I just did this 16-week thing for software development. I need to be a software developer. Like that's the end goal. But I think like that's a little, for me, I realized that was a bit of a, sorry, I have a cat coming over here. That was a bit of, I know, that was a bit of a myopic perspective for me to have. Because really what I want to do is just get into the industry, and I want to, learn how I can apply my skills. Like it doesn't just have to be in software development strictly, right? So once I kind of broadened my mentality, still keeping in mind, like I wanted to be in person, I wanted to like work for one of these three companies. That was just where I wanted to kind of like plant my feet. It made the interview process a lot more natural to me. And that's kind of where I got to tie in this like unique outside experience of, actually, I have a software developer background, and I also have this customer service background because it's what I was doing before I did Momentum. And Yeah, so I went through the interview process for the associate support engineer role. And I remember a couple weeks went by, the recruiter called me back, and just the way the conversation started, I was like, he's telling me no. And then he was like, so they really liked you. And I'm like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then he was like, they want you to come back and interview for the data support engineer role. And I was like, cool, what is that? Because I hadn't even considered that. Um, and I kind of made the mistake that Katie tells us not to make, which is I didn't apply for a role because I didn't feel qualified enough. Because when I read the description, because I had actually read the description for the data support engineer before, but 50% of it I didn't understand or didn't have any background in. But that's actually where I kind of should have been hitting, for my application. So I went back in and interviewed for that. And it turns out that the data team had basically seen my background, seen my resume. The guy who actually is now my manager had used Mixtape, which is crazy to me. Like, he made an account, he was demoing it during my interview, which is, it was so flattering because I had never seen someone do that before. And they just could tell that like I had this interest in, like kind of back end systems, which is sort of now what I work in. And that like I had these skills that were, kind of like differentiated because of my experience with Momentum. So that's how I ended up in the role that I have now. And they're very much about like they want you to empower your career, even if it's at the deficit of the company. And I think that's really cool. Like we literally talked about my career path in my interview, which the fact that I felt comfortable enough to do that, having just met these people, was really encouraging to me. So yeah, so I've been there for about 6 months now. Yeah.
That is such an amazing story. And I think this is your story and how you landed where you landed is also really good. Anybody listening can take away, regardless of what you want to do with your career, you set a very clear intention of what was the most important to you. And for you, it was, I want this experience. I've identified the companies I want to work for and the reasons I want to work for these companies. And I'm going to go for that. And that is my top intention. And that's the one priority. And then everything else, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to be flexible. I'm going to be open-minded. And that pairing with a company seeing your resume and seeing what you're capable of and knowing what they need. And that kind of came together and you were open-minded to that. And that worked out. And so now you've got a starting point and a company where you're going to have a career growth and you got in the door and you're applying your skill set every day and you're learning every day. So I have one last question for you, and then we're going to open it up. So everybody tuning in, get your questions ready. You can use the chat or you can use the raised hand reaction queue on Zoom, and we will open it up to questions. So the last question before we open it to Q&A is, you talked about the whole process of why you wanted to get into the industry, learning, the interview process. Now you're on your job. You've been in it for 6 months. What does a day in the life look like? What is an average day doing your role?
Yeah. So typically I work in the office. I took off today, so that's nice. I get a little pause in this week. So yeah, typically I work in our building, and when I go in, I first check on, we kind of like categorize our cases based on like the category and severity that they come in. So if I have like kind of things left over from the day before that I need to prioritize, I look at those first. Sometimes it's just like checking in with the customer to see, how are they doing with the solution that we're working on, or have they promoted this? Do they want me to promote this change to production? That kind of thing. It really varies. I mean, the team I work on is kind of an oddity in this, it compared to the other support teams at nCino, because just the sheer breadth of what we assist with is very large. Because instead of the other support teams will focus for the most part on different aspects of the nCino platform, and nCino runs on Salesforce, which is like a CRM tool. So that tends to be very, for the most part, like UX driven. Whereas our team focuses more on the integration that actually plugs into nCino. So it tends to be more, back end oriented, and it really varies. Like yesterday, I just had a call with a customer who was doing a server upgrade. So we're walking them through how to upgrade the Informatica server from their it's called a secure agent from their on-prem server. Um, Sometimes it's resetting. So it can be as simple as like, oh, we just need these credentials reset, and it's like a process that I'll walk through myself. Sometimes it's getting on a call with the customer and walking through mapping updates they want to make. Let's say like they have a new loan product that they want to start using when they originate loans in nCino, and they want to talk more about how we can actually map that appropriately. And these are things that may, if you have financial industry experience, sound simple, but they can be surprisingly complex sometimes. You'd be surprised like how many days of mapping can take. Sometimes it's just identifying errors, like why did the sync fail, or why is this task in the sync failing, or why am I getting these warnings? And so we kind of will like do a deep dive together and like look into debug logs, and then see if we can pull out like, hey, these records are hitting this validation rule error. That's why they're not syncing properly, because this pick list is restricted. And I know I'm saying a bunch of kind of nonsense, but it really varies. And that's kind of the cool thing, is like you're kind of just juggling all these different things at once. And I'm still kind of learning, honestly, like how to prioritize things, because we have like kind of goalposts for how to put things into certain buckets based on their severity or whatever it might be. But at the same time, like you kind of have to just develop a sense for it, I found out. So it really depends. But yeah, it's really cool. I also get to talk to other teams. Actually, my favorite experience that I've had in nCino so far was back in November. I was just transitioning to the data team from our fundamentals team. And so when you come into support, everyone starts on fundamentals, and that's kind of to get you oriented with nCino and Salesforce. So I was moving into data, and this wasn't even a data case as it turned out, but I took this case, and this bank, who apparently I found out likes to escalate things, they immediately escalated the case, and we didn't know why. And I'm sharing this because it's not actually an nCino problem, but we thought it was at the time. So when we have a bug, which we would call a PDI, a product development issue, we have this whole internal process that we have to do, where someone files it. So usually it's someone on the support team is like, hey, there's a problem with our software. Here's how you reproduce it. This is the version of the software that's affected, like product, go and check to see if you can spin this up in a demo at work and reproduce the issue. So I had to file this PDI because drop-down menus in nCino weren't working, like they wouldn't open. And the weird thing was, the further down the page you scrolled, you would have to like, the fix was to like zoom out a step, like zoom the page out to be smaller. Then you could open a pick list that was further down. Then you have to zoom out. Like the further down you scroll, the further you had to zoom out. So we knew there was some like weird UI bug going on. The next day, this had affected like probably 20 banks. And like you can't originate loans if you don't have a pick list working. So like this was a really big high severity bug. But it ended up being a Chrome issue, as we found out. So we had to do all this weird like remediation to fix it, and it ended up being fine. But there was like this 2-week kind of period where I kind of became this like point person, where I got to like talk to people on product, like talk to management on support who I'd never talked to before, who like aren't management for my team, because I was like demoing this bug. And I kind of became like one of the trusted sources on this bug and the remediation options that we had. So that was just a really cool experience, because it was unusual, but it taught me a lot about like how the other team, like how we work with all the teams here at nCino, and how we communicate with customers and with stakeholders when something goes wrong. And fortunately, that wasn't it ended up not being our fault, but it was tricky for like a week or so. All the support engineers kind of had to um, be really up to speed with like, hey, this is like kind of a production impacting issue. Like we are aware, we are talking to Salesforce, we are talking to Google. Here's what we've determined so far. Like here are the workarounds while we solve this issue. And thankfully it wasn't actually a bug that we had caused, but it was kind of a problem for a minute. So that doesn't usually happen, but sometimes like something crazy will happen, and it kind of gives you a chance to like step up and talk to people you normally wouldn't talk to. But yeah.
What an amazing experience to have. And what this reminds me of when we talk to graduates is just like, it makes me appreciate the internet and software and everything we use every day in such a unique way, because it is like, there's so many different components there's just spinning plates that make our day-to-day reality, from banking to this call that we're on to everything that we do work. And you have this piece of it where you're having to figure out, okay, it was a Chrome update or bug that affected our software, that affected banks originating loans for people, that affects their life. And you got, had a role to play in that, which is really cool. Well, let's open it up to questions from everybody that's tuning in. We've got, a little over 20 minutes left, and would love to have your questions for Stephen about his experience learning to code, his experience working in the industry, whatever questions you might have. We'll give it a second. And again, for questions, you have the chat box, which I'm going to type here. And you also have the ability to raise your hand on Zoom and ask questions. I'll give folks an opportunity. All right. Alon has a question, and Alon is coming into the next program. So he starts on April 10. Cool. And Teddy, I see your hand, so you'll be next. Alon says, Alan says, what advice would you give future momentum candidates? How can they maximize their experience?
So take the suggestions of the instructors first and foremost, and also of the community. I think like I kind of came into momentum with a little bit of a superiority complex, to be honest, because I had technical background in computing as like a byproduct of me being interested in it, but I very quickly found out that I did not know anything, and I very quickly saw my limitations, which was very humbling. But like you're gonna be working a lot and really hard. Your brain is going to friggin' stretch out. Like you're going to feel your brain growing. That's not an exaggeration. I had that happen several times throughout the course of me doing the program. So take breaks. I know this is stuff that I'm sure Jessica will cover during your orientation on like the first 2 days, but like take care of yourself. Like don't sit on the computer all day, just because like you have homework. Or when you get into phases 3 and 4, that's kind of where like the pedal really hits the metal. And that's really your chance to like step up and kind of give it what you have. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that can't be at the expense of your own personal well-being, because at the end of the day, like this is a temporary thing you're doing. Like this is your springboard into your career. And I say that because like this is stuff that was all told to me. And meanwhile, like I'm in phase 4 coding at 11 o'clock at night. And that's just not healthy. You're going to learn in phases 3 and 4 when you're working on like full stack teams about I'm forgetting the acronym, an MVP, minimum viable product, I think. You're going to learn about cutting features that you wanted to include. And that's the other thing. It's really, and I still struggle with this, like with my work, even though I'm not like coding at this moment. Don't try not to be try not to be emotionally attached to your work. And that's a lot easier said than done. But I think it's really easy for like feelings to get hurt over really silly stuff, like especially if you've been working for several hours on something and then your team doesn't use it. Like, don't take that personal, like that you still got something out of it. Um, you will learn a lot if you haven't worked with teams in this way before about just what it's like to work on in technology with other people. It can be very tricky. I know Amy, one of the instructors, like talks about seasoning. That is definitely a thing. But it's really good to get that because it just helps you, I think, become more empathetic. You don't know what other people are going through, especially over the screen, Um, a lot of you, I'm sure, are like kind of putting your lives on hold to do this. That's certainly how it was for me, and it was very, very challenging. I literally finished this and then did a renovation like right after this, and then was getting a job at the same time. Like, this is not a normal time in your life, I guess, but it's a really cool time because it's like a transition period. Um, but yeah, that's kind of, I don't know. There's more I could say, I'm sure, but I don't want to take up all the time.
Great advice. And for Colin and the folks that are coming in to the program, Stephen and our graduate community are also available on Slack. And I think being a mentor in the graduate community is so helpful when you're in the thick of it, because you've got somebody, you might be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they're on the other side and have the perspective to share, which sometimes is so helpful when you're in the thick of it. Teddy, you've got a question and you've raised your hand, so you can come off mute.
Yeah, appreciate that. So I'm just curious, Stephen, why you wanted to work in fintech. And I was wondering if you think that fintech is a good industry for software engineers who are still learning or just coming out of the boot camp, and just kind of what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, so I will say this. My desire to work in person where I lived outweighed my desire to work in a specific industry. So it wasn't, my approach to my job searching wasn't like, fintech was not at the top of my list. It was, where can I work that's in person in Wilmington that has a really good work culture? It just kind of happens that fintech is pretty big here, which I didn't really realize. That being said, though, obviously we're kind of in a weird place economically with jobs in the tech industry, and I'm sure that's like kind of been a topic of conversation or things that you've seen. But with a place like nCino, like bankers always need us. And like in my department, like in support, they always need people on support. They need people, like not machines, they need actual people who can understand the issues they're having. And so I guess, it wasn't that I was drawn to fintech initially. It was that the more I looked into it, it kind of just happened to align with my like top level job goals. And I realized that it's a valuable industry to be in because it's growing and it's changing a lot. The other thing I'll say about fintech that's really interesting, and like specifically within nCino, because we are a banking software company, is we are helping banks kind of come into the 21st century. Something that I didn't know until I started is that a lot of banks run on really old, really insecure software. They often have like up to 13 or 14 different processes for like something like originating a loan. Like that could be like a 5-step process that's done on 5 different systems. Then I'm not just making that up. Like, there are coworkers that used to work at financial institutions who are still on legacy software. So I guess like another benefit of it is you're really helping like bring banks, which are kind of, what makes the world go round in a way, into a more secure future, so to speak. And fintech, it also just has so many different like avenues and opportunities for growth. And I'm sure, with the way currency is becoming digital, like that's also going to kind of lend itself to new opportunities. So I think it's one of those industries that's really not going to be slowing down anytime soon. So I think from that perspective too, it's a really good opportunity, I guess, from like an economic standpoint for a job.
Great response. I think that's a really another good commentary too on what's happening just in the broader conversation around technology is there's still so much opportunity, and there's so many industries that are, to your point, Stephen, like the banking industry has to continue running. And so even though technology might be more advanced, they've been running systems because they have to keep the lights on. And there are government entities that have that. There's a lot of supply chain processes and other industries that are running that way. And so there's so much opportunity to, support those industries, and people have to get involved because it's still more complicated. It's like you've got all these different spinning plates. Jerome has a question.
Hi there, Stephen. Thanks for coming to talk to us. I guess you talked about in your interview process about they talked to you about potential career paths, and I was curious, what do you think that would look like for you starting with a support job as opposed to like a full-on coding job? Do you think you would eventually want to transition into coding? How might support be advantageous to you instead of starting in a straight software dev job?
That's a great question because it is something that I think about. Like, I will tell you, like, one of my goals with my career is to move into software development as my role. I think I touched on this earlier, but I kind of realized that I wasn't giving myself enough opportunity just by looking at like strictly moving into software development. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I realized, well, actually, nCino is a really big product. It's like an a la carte offering of solutions for financial institutions. Like Jessica said, there's a lot of spinning plates, and it's funny because like even moving off of a legacy system into our software, which is an all-in-one solution, effectively, even within that, it is incredibly complicated. So when I speak of, working at this company, they really respect the idea of people wanting to move to a place that works for them. And so I told them, I was like, one day, like my goal is to be a software engineer, like maybe for this company. And I think that I would really benefit from being in this role and learning, the product from the customer's perspective. Because then I could, when that opportunity presents itself, I could say, hey, I've been here, for however long. I've learned these things about the product that these people on the outside who are interviewing for this job don't know about, right? Like I understand our product from a perspective that is beneficial to this team because I can bring forward the voice of the customer, which I think in bigger companies can sometimes get lost. And also, like with nCino, I've actually started to learn more about the other departments that are available, and it's really like sparked my interest in what other opportunities, even outside of software engineering, like that I might want to try. They are trying to expand their international presence. They have got offices in EMEA, in APAC. They have a satellite office in Toronto. They have one in Utah. So there are so many opportunities to, like ICs, implementation consultants. There is a department called Global Channels, which is one of their focuses is trying to bring nCino into new countries, trying to internationalize our brand. And that, I studied German, and I also, my concentration in political science was international relations. So like, I'm seeing, all these kind of, the way these threads can be tied together, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of opportunity, and I've realized, from the job search and recruitment process and what I've been doing so far, is that like, I didn't need to, like me just trying to be a software engineer just for the sake of being a software engineer, I think is selling myself short. Because I think like what you get out of this program is so much more than learning how to code. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. And some healthy reminders as well. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the question, Jerome. And Jerome just graduated, so round of applause.
Cool. Congrats.
And I'm still alive, everyone else who's about to start.
Another person that's reached the other side of things. For you. I think that is actually a prospective student giving me a ring. Do we have any other questions out there? Stephen can answer for you as we wrap up. I feel like I just saw somebody unmute. So if you did, don't be shy, you can jump in. I feel like we need like the theme song for.
Oh, I also wanted to compliment your shirt, Stephen. Yeah. Math nerd, the son of a geometry teacher, is very geometrical. Love it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. Stephen, can you drop your LinkedIn link to the chat so folks can connect with you and reach out? And I will go ahead and start wrapping it up and letting everybody know that's tuning in. I see a lot of familiar names. So I know some of you are starting programs with Momentum this summer. We look forward to working with you and hope that you continue to make connections with folks like Stephen and Jerome as you come into the program, because the network is really supportive. And Stephen mentioned earlier that he talked to Hank, which is another graduate of ours who was at nCino probably about 2 years in advance of you, who helped get you the job. And so the Momentum Network is really key to helping you further your career and get jobs and get in the door. A person that has graduated that's done well in their career is going to be your best resource and getting into a company and into the doors. So be sure to start making those connections. A plug for Momentum, we do have a couple seats available in our next class, which starts on April 10th, and that program graduates the first week of August. So you'll be out in the job search well before the end of the calendar year. We also have openings and are enrolling in the next class, which starts on May 8th. And that class comes out right before Labor Day, the Labor Day holiday in September. So if you're interested in learning more, reach out to us on our website. We have our web chat that goes all throughout the day. You will interact with either myself or another couple members on the team. And we do this a day in the life series at least once a month. So if this was helpful to you, one of the best ways to explore if this career avenue is the right fit for you is by listening to people who are in the tech, who are in the industry, and listening to the myriad of things that they're doing. We really encourage people to explore. This is a big change to make for many. So make sure you come into it eyes wide open. And let's see, Manny says, popping in to see how you're doing. It's amazing to hear from another Team 12 Thriving member. Stephen, way to go, Stephen. So awesome. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up today's session. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being generous with your time and sharing your work. It's been really fun to hear what you've been up to. And I'm so glad to hear that you're enjoying life down in Wilmington and working at nCino. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to connect with Stephen on LinkedIn. And that concludes a day in the life. Take care, everyone.